Welcome to ACFIM Talks. We are looking at zeroing in on political corruption, a flashlight on political financing ahead of Uganda's 2026 general elections. As Uganda approaches the 2026 elections, the spotlight is on the scale and magnitude of political corruption that is pervading national politics. Today, we are zeroing in on a subject of corruption in political office, including in the August House. We shall look at how the citizens have responded. In fact, as we speak today, all access roads to Parliament have been blocked by the police. Reason, the fear that the anti-corruption march to Parliament is alive and well. While in Changwazi for the retreat, the president, his cabinet, members of Parliament from his party National Resistance Movement, which has been in power for over close to 4 decades, and the permanent secretaries from different ministries expressed deep concerns about the scale of commercialization of politics and recommended enactment of campaign finance law. Last but not least, we shall look at the recent report of the Auditor General that raises critical issues about the management of public funds dispersed to political parties that have representation in Parliament. Joining us today are 2 distinguished guests who bring a wealth of knowledge and expertise on the subject of political finance, political corruption, and the law. We will hear from Ms. Christine Mugerwa-Kasule, who is a legal expert and the Deputy Secretary of the Democratic Party in Uganda. We are also joined by Mr. Henry Muguzi, a political finance expert and pro-democracy activist. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to ACFIM Talks. For our viewers joining us live from wherever you are, we will be taking your questions and comments throughout the show. You can also join the conversation on social media using the hashtag ACFIM Talks. Your voice is crucial in this dialogue, and we want to hear from you as well. So I will start with you, Christine. You worked at the Inspectorate of Government for a lengthy period of time. What is your take on the current levels of political corruption and the renewed efforts by the president to curb it?
Thank you very much, Abel. Glad to be here on the ACFIM Talks. I worked for a very long time with the Inspectorate of Government, a total of over 15 years. And of course, I saw corruption, all different types, but I think the levels have really reached a point whereby it has gone beyond corruption in individual organizations, but it's like the whole society is eaten up by corruption. So this is where we find, we look at the levels of corruption. I think they've reached unprecedented levels. And I think we need to take very serious action on corruption. Otherwise, our country is going to sink under the burden of corruption that we see today.
Thank you, Christine, for that. I will now jump to Henry. Henry, you've just heard Christine share some of her views on the current levels of corruption and the renewed efforts by the president in trying to curb it. What would you make of the current levels and also the renewed efforts by the president to try to curb this monster that has perverted most of the societies in Uganda?
Thank you, Ebo, and thank you for having me. And of course, it's a pleasure for me to share the platform with my colleague in arms, Christine. At the time she was at the Inspectorate of Government, I used to be an anti-corruption activist with the Anti-Corruption Coalition of Uganda, and we used to interact with her very closely because she was managing, I think, the office on public relations or something like that. And so she was the go-to person every time we needed to interact with the inspectorate. Quite an honor to share the platform with you, Christine. So the matter of political corruption, I think it's at levels that should concern every Ugandan that wishes the country well. I think if you are comparing it, if you're calling it a monster, it is a monster that needs to be caged immediately, because it has pervaded, as you put it, all institutions. And if it has, one of the institutions that has suffered so much at the, under the weight of political corruption is the August House. The Parliament of Uganda, that is supposed to be an organ of people's sovereignty, that people have turned into a marketplace for deal making. If what we saw on the Twitter exhibition is anything to go by, it tells you that the political corruption at that level has a lot to do with why the leaders in parliament have, do not seem to be acting and responding to the interests of the citizenry. And therefore, it's at levels that are concerning. On the question of the renewed efforts of the president, as we are seeing them, it's difficult too early to tell, because we have been here before. I have always said that for me, as an anti-corruption activist, during the scandals of Global Fund and Gavi and so on, when we saw ministers being arrested and taken to Luzira, you expected that now the president, has begun to bite. But of course, as we came to see it, it was mostly for optical purposes. And therefore, I think the president needs to convince Ugandans this time around that he's serious, because political corruption has to be reined in. A number of pundits, political pundits, have always said that the president lacks the resolve, but also the determination to fight corruption. And some of them have even alluded to the fact that perhaps there is a nexus between the political corruption and the maintenance of the regime in office. So these are things that narratives that the president has to challenge. Of course, we know that if political corruption is going to be dealt with, it has to start with the tone at the top, and that the tone at the top doesn't have to just exist; it should be consistent. And that consistency should be judged over time. And so we are waiting to see whether the current prosecutions go through and whether or not those that are found culpable will pay the price. Because the most, and I like it when you are starting the show, when you are saying, also mentioning issues of campaign finance, because we have come to learn that there is a very strong nexus between political corruption and campaign financing in Uganda. And therefore, if you want, the best place to start, if you want to do that, is to address the way, in the manner in which campaigns are financed. Because the men and women who spend a lot, in excess of 600 million to get elected, like we saw in the previous election, when they get in office, their major preoccupation is either to recoup what they invested or to pay back the benefactors that invested in them. And in the process, it's the ordinary voter that suffers, because then the person that is in that office is more accountable to the people that bankrolled him, or the moneylenders that borrowed him money, or he, or to himself to recoup what he invested, than to the voters. And of course, you've seen many voters over time complaining that Parliament, they are coming out and voting for members of Parliament and other political office bearers, has not translated into improvement in their livelihoods. And so the current renewed efforts by the president, as he called them, to rein in and zero in on the men and women that engage in political corruption are efforts that are very highly welcome. We can only pray that he goes, he goes through with this, because as we saw, like the elephant before it, the men and women that engaged were suspected of engaging in the theft of iron sheets are still working, and so let's wait and see what that becomes of this. And for me, my fear is it ending up to be another optical thing, as we saw the others before it. Over to you, Abel.
Thank you, Henry. Now I want to bring back Christine. In your view, what is the president doing right that he never did before? We can also see that your former office, which is the Inspectorate of Government, is being sidelined in all this. Is it your sense that should be continue to be sidelined?
I don't believe that there is sidelining per se, but maybe the levels of corruption have reached levels whereby a single office is not sufficient to curb the corruption that is going on. And I think the president tried to set up a unit in his own office, which I think, you can look at it in two ways. One, it was an effort to actually enhance the fight against corruption and show the political goodwill to fight corruption by having a unit in his office that, shows his commitment to fighting corruption. However, sometimes when you have several institutions whose jurisdiction is not clear, you will find that, they fall over themselves. They, at the end of the day, the corrupt become very adept at dodging, the different institutions that have been established. So I think that the mandates, didn't need to overlap. There was a need whereby, they could have said that maybe the unit in the president's office would handle cases whereby, the people, have such high level of, when influence peddling is one of the means of corruption. So if somebody is very high level, you might find that it is very difficult for, certain caliber of person to go after them. However, the qualifications for a person to become IGG are also quite high. So I would imagine that a person of the IGG is also powerful enough to go after the powerful. And I think maybe, the cases that the unit in the president's office would have handled would have been the cases where, the IGG feels disempowered for some reason or other and needs the political backing of the office of the president. So when I look at, how have we demonstrated our commitment to fighting corruption, I think we still have a lot of work to do as a country, and I think it will take every institution and every person. Henry was talking about, the political corruption. When you look at, I looked at the topic and I asked myself that political corruption, does it mean corruption by politicians or corruption in politics? Because we all know that a very simple definition of corruption is the use of public office for private gain. And everywhere you see in Uganda, people are using public offices for private gain. And a recent study by Afrobarometer showed that the public has lost confidence in politicians, because they think that they are not interested in serving their interests, they are not interested in, providing services to the people. So I think the politicians need to actually realize that they hold these offices in trust. But also, on the other hand, the people, the voters, also on their part, need to engage themselves in the fight against corruption by resisting handouts during campaigns. Or if not, they need to demonstrate that they're also going to fight corruption by refusing handouts or not electing people that give them handouts. This is how, the corruption in politics is negatively impacting our governance as a country. It's also impacting it negatively in terms of democracy, because you know that very many women and young people cannot afford the political campaigns. Henry has already said that the cost of campaigns is already too high. So, and Uganda, we are trying to become an inclusive democracy. We are trying to ensure that, we engage the marginalized majorities like women and youth, as well as the minorities. And you will find that certainly young people do not have the resources to engage in campaigning. And you will find that we will have politics of exclusion. And that's why you see that the quota, despite having affirmative action for very many years, women in public office cannot exceed 1/3. And yet we have had affirmative action for a long time. We really have women that are capable of, participating on open seats, running for open seats. But the cost is too high. The availability of credit to women is also very, very, limited, and they find themselves unable to effectively engage in these very expensive campaigns. So, as a country, if we want to be more democratic, to have a more inclusive kind of governance, we must curb the levels of corruption in politics and make sure that we open up the space for the marginalized majorities as well as the minorities to effectively participate in the politics and make sure that their voices get heard.
Thank you, Christine. I want to now bring Henry on this. You've had Christine share her views, and one of the things she said that from a place of work, that is the Inspector of Government, cannot alone fight corruption. What is your take? Do we need to create more anti-corruption units to support it, or it's high time they equip them with the necessary capacity so that they can be able to take on their mandate? Because I've seen we as the government, government is creating more parallel institutions that are not really legal to also supplement on the work of the IGG. Is it the right move or something else? What's your take on it, Henry?
Thank you very much. Of course, corruption is such a complex phenomena, and when it comes to political corruption, it becomes even more complicated because, and Christine was also asking an interesting question earlier on, whether when we say political corruption, we are referring to corruption in a political office or corruption by politicians. So apparently, it's those politicians that occupy political office. So that corruption we're talking about is where the men and women elected in office use their positions to enrich themselves. So corruption is so complicated. First of all, as you know, it's a crime of calculation. So they've calculated it. It is also a crime of syndicate. So there are quite a number of people that agree to cover up tracks for each other and so on. But the other thing is that you cannot fight it alone. So, but before I go there, I think the old adage has always been that too many cooks always spoil the soup. Christine alluded to that. A situation where you have many units created without clear roles, and sometimes these roles overlapping, they're likely to conflict. But that said, we think that the president, from where he sits or stands, he sees what we don't see and his private information we don't have. Maybe he thinks that in view of the level of complexity that political corruption in Uganda is at, maybe the best intervention is to create them. So let's say give them the benefit of doubt. Yeah, but corruption cannot be fought by just institutions because of its complexity. It must be fought from many directions and from many dimensions. As you understand that because it's such a complicated phenomena, it's also the reason why when we talk about corruption, we use military terms such as combat corruption, such as fight corruption. So it tells you that corruption is not a simple crime, okay? And therefore, it's mandated by law, such as the Inspectorate of Government to fight corruption, are well capitalized, are well facilitated, but also are given the leg room to operate. But also you need other national stakeholders. The media has to play its role. The civil society has to play its role. The private sector has to play its role. The citizens have to play their role. All leaders at all levels must play their role, because single-handedly, the president cannot succeed, however much he wants to, and we would be convinced that he can. So you need all these playing their role, their part. If everybody played their part, then we should have removed the layer we call enablers and accomplices, because by the private sector choosing to play on, it means that they become then accomplices. So, but they're also enablers in the technocracy that are, facilitating this corruption to happen. So all those have to be, activated. But most importantly, every stakeholder. If the citizens don't report, earlier on, I was, for example, heartened. This happened when I was watching a documentary of the lack of water in some districts in Karamoja. And when I remembered that, the people that would have made sure that the funds are spent well to provide water are the same people who are diverting the funds to build the arcades in Buate and the Bulindo. Then you get to start. But they're doing this because the politicians that have been elected in office to superintend and supervise these technocrats have decided to play ball. And so when political corruption then intersects with the technical corruption, then all hell breaks loose. So these many units that have been created, we can give them a benefit of doubt. But the most important thing is to make sure that the roles are well defined, but also that they are not, they understand that they cannot do it alone. We need also to take off effort to make sure that the other stakeholders in the country, citizens, and all the different groups of citizens, including religious leaders, who are also accomplices in a sense, that they have tended to glorify the men and women who steal public funds because they take some of the funds to the churches. So I think if we have everybody activated and everybody, convinced that this is a war that everybody must participate in, and that it is the fact that we are losing, as we are told by the Inspectorate of Government, close to 10 trillion shillings to corruption, should be a situation that should now activate and wake up every Ugandan to participate in executing their role. Mostly, we have the information. Ugandans have this information. It's that information that the units the president has set up would need to act on in order for them to help the president, go through with his renewed efforts, but also that we all have to play our role. Over to you, Abel.
Thank you, Henry. Now I want to go back to Christine. Your party, Democratic Party, many claim it's in bed with the party in power, that's the National Resistance Movement. Are these renewed efforts in the fight against corruption one of the things you agreed upon in principle?
Thank you, Abel. The things that we agreed upon in our cooperation with the ruling party were four, one of which is the peaceful and democratic presidential transition. We want to make sure that power in Uganda at president level can be smoothly, handed over without causing bloodshed. We also agreed to have constitutional and electoral reforms, and we agreed to have a national dialogue as well as national reconciliation. So the processes of national reconciliation and dialogue are supposed to usher in, a Uganda where people put the country first, as opposed to minding about their differences. So it's supposed to promote unity and a sense of patriotism among the citizens. However, I think when we are talking about, political corruption, corruption by politicians or corruption in political processes, we can curb it if we engage in electoral reforms. So I think to that extent, the area of electoral reforms would take care of the corruption that is happening in the electoral processes. That is not to say that, of course, we have not been having, regulations in place. We do as a country, but I think the enforcement has been poor in terms of, the corruption in the electoral processes. And I think it also comes from the point whereby, the taxpayers' money is availed to political parties for purposes of enhancing their participation in democratic processes. However, we did have a discussion under the auspices of the inter-party organization dialogue, and the one they call IPOD, everybody knows about that. We agreed as the political parties in parliament to share a certain portion of taxpayers' money as allocated by government. We share it. Administrative costs are supposed to be shared, depending on the representation of the party in parliament, and then for the election funds, we are supposed to share them equally across all parties. However, we have never had that in operation, that when it comes to election period, that we are able to share the election money we're able to share the funds equally at during elections. So when I look at in terms of even the corruption in politics, we need to also look at things like that. That when we have reached an agreement to share funds, these are taxpayers' funds. We are supposed to share them for purposes of effective participation, but we are not availed those funds as the political parties that are in the opposition. So we need to look at that. And these are some of the electoral reforms that I think, we need to look at, political corruption can also be to an extent that it comes from electoral processes, can be curbed through electoral reforms. So this presents us an opportunity. We do also have in place our President General as the Minister for Justice and Constitutional Affairs, with the goodwill and capacity to actually drive this agenda. So I would encourage all people who, well-wishers, people who are interested in having better governance, better elections, fair competition between the different political actors, and people who are interested in ensuring that we are curbing the influence of money on politics as well as policy making. All such people should get involved, bring forward their proposals for electoral reforms, and I'm sure my President and Minister of Justice would be very happy to receive those reforms and present them to Parliament for debate. So this is an area I think that we are yet to tap in as the political actors. It's an opportunity really that we should take advantage of.
Yes, thank you so much, Christine. You talked about the issue of campaign financing, how government's supposed to disburse funds to political parties. One of the critical issues which has been disturbing most of the political parties and also actors like ACFIM that have been following the money in politics is that provision in section 14 of the Political Party and Organization Act, whereby government is mandated to disburse money equally, as you have already said, equally to political parties with representation in parliament during election period. Why is it that these political parties that have representation in parliament don't raise that issue and maybe take government to court so that they can be able to effect that provision which they have ignored for quite now almost 2 electoral cycles? I would like to hear from you, Christine, and also Henry. What is your view on that? Why is government hell-bent on ignoring that provision each and every time? I'll start with you, Christine.
Thank you, Abel. We thought that this was something that we would be able to negotiate again under the auspices of IPOD, because it presents us also an opportunity for us to dialogue. And I think also Henry would, say more on this, that we actually considered taking the government to court as political parties together with the ACFIM to actually push for implementation of this provision of our agreement. So I think maybe Henry could talk a little bit more on how we conceived the case. It was going to be a public interest kind of litigation, and I think if I recall correctly, 2 political parties, DP and JEMA, were the ones that were going to represent the political actors. And of course, we had a very strong partner in ACFIM because their mandate is on campaign financing, on exactly this issue. So this was an issue of interest to both of us, and one civil society, and on the other hand, the political parties. So I think this is something we are yet to take forward, but also there was a delay in really getting the parties together to sign the new memorandum for IPOD. I think we are almost done, and I think it is an opportunity for us to actually try to dialogue on this and make sure that next time, there's fairness in the distribution of campaign monies from the public purse. So I think we are going to have that discussion. If the discussion fails, then we shall have no choice but to use the judicial process. So over to you, Henry, to talk a little bit more about the case that we were going to lodge against government for our fair share.
Thank you very much, Christine. Of course, that's a matter we considered because the Section 14, I think D, mandates the Electoral Commission, mandates government to finance political parties represented in Parliament for the purpose of elections. And when that is the reason they are disbursing the money, then the formula for sharing should be equal basis. So we noticed that this is a command that the stakeholders had ignored, both the Electoral Commission that disburses this money, but also the Ministry of Finance that appropriates this money had not done so. And therefore, we had that option of seeking interpretation of the court, whether the commission is in order. But of course, as you know, matters of court take time. But as that is there, and as you are submitting, Christine, I remembered, was it true yesterday or a day before yesterday? We had I was one of the many guests invited by the Electoral Commission in a stakeholder event where they were revealing to us their revised roadmap. I think your party was represented by one person. I don't know whether you are too busy, you didn't come. But the thing is that that question was raised by the representative of JEMA, and the Electoral Commission chairperson struggled to find answers. But there's one thing I learned, therefore, that there's lack of proactive involvement. So the answer from the Electoral Commission was that when the Ministry of Finance is releasing money, they are releasing only that money only in respect to the other section on routine everyday running of the party. So the Ministry of Finance, according to the Justice, had not released the money that they have signposted as this is for in respect for elections. So the question then would have been then why is the Electoral Commission not submitting the budget to the Minister of Finance? And they should have done this by last year or year before, that elections are coming, that the release of 2025-2026 should have a provision for supporting political parties for the purpose of elections. You get to see that there is a lack of proactiveness. I think the Electoral Commission is so busy, preoccupied with other things, that there's no one to proactively take on this. So I think it would require, engagement from different circles. And I like it when she says they had thought they would solve that within the iPod dial platform. But I think this is pretty much going to be a boardroom matter that will be resolved in the boardrooms, and it can, for as long as the stakeholders, the harmed parties, can put up a meaningful, demand. Because as you know, many of these things are demanded; they cannot be produced on a silver platter. So I think that engagement needs to be scaled up. Yeah, but that said, Ebo, I think there are those issues of what do the political parties use the monies for when they receive it for routine basis. And I think we should also interrogate that because the Auditor General's report highlights quite a number of things. And I also like it that from Chankwanzi, you begin to see that at long last, government is smelling the coffee, and because the narrative as we learned was that there was a proposal to consider enacting a law that regulates campaign finance, So at long last, you get to see that the government is rising to pay attention to matters of political finance, because money can actually, can be toxic and can be used to erode the very democracy we are trying to build. And so I think these are some of the things I would want to think about, and I'm happy that Christine is here, representing the party, so that we can also get the other side of the story. Because I saw the other day when the Secretary General of BP, Honorable Siranda was being interviewed, and I think he was trying to shy away from many of these things. So I think, for me, I'm encouraged that at least the government is smelling the coffee finally, and beginning to rise to the occasion with regard to issues pertaining to political finance. Over to you, Ebo.
Thank you, Henry, for that. So we shall go for a short break, then we shall return and dive deep into some of those things you've raised, especially on the areas of campaign financing. So let's go for a short break, then we shall return. Welcome back from that short break. Now I will go back to you, Henry. You know that ACFIM has been advocating for enactment of campaign finance law since 2016. How did you, as an organization, receive the news from Jankwanzi that at the long last, government is considering to enact a law on campaign financing? And how would it check commercialization of electoral politics, which has become now a menace in our politics?
Thank you, Ebo. Well, the law on to regulate campaign finance has been long overdue. As you put it right, we've been advocating for it since 2016. Because it was in 2016 when we started flagging the monster of commercialized politics. And we did warn that if nothing is done to control and cage this monster, politics shall become a preserve of the super rich, because of the amounts of monies that get into it, but also because of the mentality of the voters that seems to be continuing to stray the wrong way, in a sense that they would expect quite a number of things, and they would levy quite a number of burdens and demands on the people that have offered themselves to contest. And so, of course, there have been challenges here and there. There's been a lack of support, but and the tone, the tone at the top has not been supportive. And we have been trying to use the media, but also other means, to make sure that it comes to the recognition of the regime that this is a need. And so when we received the news, we received them with happiness, and of course happy that finally government was rising to the occasion. And of course we have over time been able to develop model laws. There's a time we worked on the private members bill, which never saw the light of day. There's a time we worked with the Electoral Commission, and the Attorney General had to provide these provisions in the amendment bills that were presented, were tabled in Parliament in July 2019. But again, the provisions on campaign finance were striked out by the members of Parliament, who deferred that to the 11th Parliament. So we received this with quite happiness and, of course, encouragement to soldier on with the demands. And we can only applaud the members that, in their wisdom, chose to mention this as one of the top priorities. But of course, talking about it is one thing, and implementing it is another. And therefore, now our prayer, but also request, is that the good government in place should be able to walk through with it. I think we'll continue to engage with the spokesperson, Dr. Chris Bariomosi, who revealed this as one of the things that were discussed, and continue to see how we can also be of help, but also keep encouraging. And we call upon the rest of the Ugandans to support this idea, because governments by their very nature act when there is public demand. Without public demand, they don't demand, they don't act. So I think we would encourage and welcome the rest of the citizenry to demand their leaders, wherever they are, whether in parliament or otherwise, to prioritize this matter, because commercialization of politics is one of the biggest, cancers that Uganda is grappling with. Over to you, Abel.
Thank you, Henry, for that. Now, I want to go back to Christine. What is the position of the Democratic Party on the enactment of campaign finance law? I'm asking you this because I'm very aware that you are president of the party. Norbert Mao is the current Minister of Constitutional Affairs, under which the enactment of such a law would easily be incorporated in the electoral reforms that might be tabled in Parliament.
Thank you, Abel. Obviously, as a party, which is we are known for our struggle for good governance. That is our legacy, and that is our brand. So for DP, the fight against corruption is something that we don't run away from. We know that we must do it. Our president has been vocal on these issues of corruption, and of course, we can have the best laws in the world, but if they are not able to be enforced, then they'll just remain on the law books as white elephants. So really, we as a party that is known for good governance, we do support all efforts that will be taken and that are going to be taken and that are being taken to fight corruption in this country. And for us as a party, for all of Uganda's problems and questions, our party has an answer. We have a party platform that is advocating for the confiscation of ill-gotten gains. Up to now, we have not seen this happening. And of course, all the time when we have to be conscious that the people, the politicians, sometimes when it comes to making laws, the ones in parliament, the politicians in parliament, they don't want to make a law that is going to stop them from having an edge over their opponents. That is why you see one of the things that they passed, there's a parliament, I don't remember which parliament it was. I think it was the 10th parliament, the 9th, I don't remember. As soon as they came into parliament, they changed the nomination fee, which was 200,000 to 2 million. And the purpose of that was to lock out a certain section of people. Even now, when you look at people, who are occupying offices, they are amassing as much money as possible to make sure that they have an edge over their rivals in the coming campaign. So they don't have the goodwill to actually enact a law that is going to curb the influence of money in politics, because they are themselves using it to lock out opponents. So we need to have, politicians that wish their country well, politicians that are going to enact a law. And I think they really need to look at this, not that it is going to empower their opponents, but that it is going to help them, compete. Because the more they let money, go and, apply unfettered in the political space, the more they'll be affected by it. Because somebody will come from a very big office, because not everybody, in politics comes from either general public. Some of them are public servants, but now you know that also public servants are very corrupt. So even the public servants, somebody will come from a public service job, having amassed a lot of money, and you, the politician who refused to pass the law, you're going to be the victim of, this person's excessive spending. So I think that the politicians need to wish this country well, and they need to be objective when they are passing laws, and make sure that the laws that they are passing are not self-serving, but are serving the good, the public good. So I really, really encourage our politicians, our members of parliament, to pass for us very good laws that are curbing, the influence of money in our electoral and political processes. Back to you, Abel.
Thank you, Christine. Now, I want us to dive deep to the recent report that was released by the Office of the Auditor General, which puts out management of which pointed out that management of public funds dispersed to political parties is representation in Parliament. The report highlights, among other things, flaws in management and accountability of these funds. I want to bring you, Henry, here. ACFIM has been trying to look for this information rolled to the Office of the Auditor General several times on why political parties are not audited. Finally, we have seen a report which clearly highlights how the political parties have been audited and how they have been managing this fund. What is your sense on some of the evidence that has been released by the Office of Auditor General, whereby most parties don't have work plans and they also don't manage these public funds very well?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I will be brief. So for me, I am, really excited that the Auditor General has finally done something, because I remember the first time we wrote to him, he felt that we are being too political and pushing him into an undesirable situation. But I think after reflecting, decided to go ahead and do this. So we applaud it and thank him for this. I think political parties have to do more, because this we are talking about public funds, and public funds have a law that governs them, the Public Financial Management Act. It provides that they must be spent. There are certain principles that must be followed. The problem is that there is darkness shrouding the management of this money. The Electoral Commission is not upfront in informing the public that the money has been disbursed, how much. When the reports are submitted, we don't get to be notified that they are available for public viewing, and therefore we don't know what political parties use it for. But sometimes also the delays by the Ministry of Finance to disburse these monies, which makes them arrive late after the political party has incurred debts. So they use this money to pay arrears, and when you're paying arrears, some of the principles of public financial management are, negated. And so for me, I think it's a report that political parties should take with open arms and use it as a learning event, because political parties, being public utility entities, have to be subjected to public scrutiny, especially if they are continuing to receive money from the national budget, which is taxpayers' money, and therefore should be exposed to public scrutiny. So I would be eager now to hear from Christine herself on her own take from that report. Over to you, Christine Ebo.
Thank you very much, Henry. Unfortunately, I've only read excerpts of that report. I am yet to actually address my mind fully to it. But of course, you know, as a political party, that I have said is you know, that whose legacy is about good governance. We welcome anything, and we welcome public scrutiny over the things that we do. And actually, I think ours is one of the parties where the members of the National Executive Committee and the National Council members are able to access our documentation without any need for you know, there's no restriction. The National Executive Committee is always given our budgets, our planned activities for scrutiny and for you know, to pass them. And we do have policies and systems in place. But you know, when you're audited, that is when you understand whether what you've put in place is sufficient to ensure, you know, the best use of the resources that are availed. One of the things that I noticed, you know, that really does fall in my docket is the work plan issue. And I vowed to members to take it up because I know that we have had sittings of the National Executive Committee where we have passed our, we do have a strategic plan, a 5-year strategic plan. Every year we report back on what we have done throughout the year. We have provided, we used to have a backlog of audit reports. We are now up to date. In the recent sitting of our National Executive Committee, you know, the excerpts of the audited accounts were presented, the relevant bits that were, you know, necessary to make sure that members are able to debate and discuss. So the real issues with regard to our audits were presented to the National Executive Committee. And we tell members of DP that they can go to our secretariat at any time and ask to see, you know, the information that we have there that is available for members to hold their leaders accountable. So we have that in place. We do also make sure that every year we pass the budget, but of course the monies are never enough for our planned activities and our budgets. So I was wondering, and which I said I would take up with the officers at the Secretariat, as to why the auditors didn't see the work plan from the party, and yet we pass planned activities on an annual basis. So that one we are going to look at as a party. Anything that has been pointed out to us, you know, we are going to look into it. That is how our leadership is structured, and that is, we believe we must keep improving our systems, our policies. We believe that, you know, our members need to have access to information that we say the members must have access to. So the leaders are not afraid to be held accountable, and we are also leaders who are committed to taking the necessary actions to improve anything that is not working well.
Thank you, Christine, for that. Our time is fast spent, so I want to ask all of you one question which you respond to. What are some of the measures you think can be put in place to ensure that public funds political parties are utilized in accordance to the provisions of the Public Financial Management Act? I will start with you, Henry.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think, Christian, one of the things political party leaders have to address is, they should engage in proactive disclosure of this information. So I don't know what stops, for example, you as the Democratic Party from posting this information on your website. Information on the work plan and the amounts that has come in and what's been used for, so that you stand out as an island of integrity. I think this is one thing that the Electoral Commission as well, which disperses this money, has to come up with guidelines of how to account for this money. For example, it should be mandatory that every political party must have an annual work plan that has been approved by the Central Executive Committee or National Executive Committee, whichever organ is responsible for approval of work plans, and there must be a minute to confirm that, because that's the key starting point for managing public funds. You cannot manage public funds and spend them without an annual work plan, and which has been approved duly in accordance with the organs of the party. But I think also as the citizens, we need to pick up more information as either as supporters of parties or as members of parties, but also as well-wishers of these political parties, to pick interest in how they utilize the taxpayers' money that's sent there, because this is public funds, and public funds should be utilized transparently. Over to you, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Henry, for sharing that, and I certainly take it back. Of course, proactive disclosure is always best. However, because of limited funding, our website is not up and running as we would like it to be, but we will do our best to make sure that, we can disclose, because for us in DP, we literally have no secrets. So we will do what needs to be done to empower our members to hold us accountable. And we shall do that. And also for the public to hold us accountable. So we'll certainly consider doing proactive disclosure. And it is, of course, one of the best practices to curb corruption. I want to thank you so much for inviting me for this ACFIN talk. And I look forward to being here again anytime that you would like to invite me or any member of our political party. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed the engagement, and I hope to be back again.
Thank you so much, Christine, for honoring our invite, and also Henry for sharing your views. I want to thank you all, and also our viewers outside there. We have come to the end of today's show, but we shall keep on bringing you more of ACFIN talks, and just keep in touch with us and follow us on most of our social media platforms, and also keep sharing your comments. This show will still be on YouTube, so you can watch if you have missed some of parts of it, so you can keep rewatching it and also sharing your views so that we can be able to see what can we improve and other things. Thank you.